Welcome to the Deep Dive. We take your stack of sources articles, research, your own notes, and plunge headfirst into the most important knowledge and insights they contain.
Exactly.
Today, we're immersing ourselves in a collection of documents that reveal, well, a terrifying hidden world operating just beneath the surface of our own. Think of it as peering through a crack in reality.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it. These documents meticulously outline a clandestine struggle against forces that really defy human understanding, entities and phenomena existing outside our known reality.
Right.
And at the heart of this material is an organization, Delta Green, that's apparently been grappling with these unnatural threats for generations.
And the fascinating part, from these sources anyway, is how they reportedly use the most mundane, bureaucratic aspects of government
Yeah, like paperwork and clearances.
against the most unspeakable horrors imaginable. It's quite a contrast.
It really is. It's an incredible premise, isn't it? Our sources present a very specific, detailed view of this secret conflict, laying out its history, the key players involved, the truly terrifying things they face, and how they attempt the impossible task of containing them.
So our mission in this deep dive is to unpack these documents thoroughly.
Right. We'll extract the essential knowledge, try to understand the structure of this hidden world, the nature of the threats it contains, and the people who are forced to fight within it.
Ultimately, we want to reveal the most important insights these sources offer about what it truly takes to operate when the unnatural is not only real, but actively trying to unravel everything you know.
Let's dive in.
Okay, let's unpack this. The story of Delta Green, according to these files, isn't a sudden creation. It has deep roots, early seeds planted even before World War II. And one event stands out in the source material as a foundational moment: the 1928 Innsmouth raid.
Project Pizalox, yes. The sources describe this not as some quiet federal investigation, but as a significant military operation.
Really?
Yeah, ordered by the Coolidge administration's Office of Naval Intelligence, ONI. It was, in effect, a localized battle waged against the town of Innsmouth and the aquatic humanoids known as Deep Ones who influenced it.
A battle. That implies a level of open conflict you wouldn't associate with a typical government action. How large-scale was this, really?
The documents make it clear this was substantial. On the naval side, it reportedly involved torpedoing the undersea city of VAiLLEY.
Torpedoing an undersea city.
Exactly, severing a major hub of Deep One power. And on land, federal agents and Marines fought for days through the town against cultists and the Deep Ones themselves.
Oh.
The immediate chilling outcome was the capture of a staggering 209 hybrid prisoners.
209.
Individuals with clear Deep One ancestry taken into federal custody and incarcerated indefinitely, without any form of trial.
Indefinitely no trial.
Can you imagine the sheer logistical and frankly ethical nightmare of that containment?
Held in federal custody, without trial. For seeing the truth, or perhaps being the truth, that detail alone is jarring. What happened to the evidence, the stuff they found there?
Well, the captured materials from Innsmouth were funneled into the system. The Black Chamber, which was the U.S. cryptanalysis unit at the time.
Right, the code breakers.
Yeah, they took possession of strange tablets and papers recovered from the town. Despite their expertise, it took them 2 agonizing years to translate what would become known in these documents as the Book of Dagon.
The Book of Dagon, proof of an ancient, hostile, aquatic civilization. And this earth-shattering information was presented to President Hoover.
On November 2nd, 1929. The sources note this was a particularly difficult year for Hoover, already dealing with the fallout from the Black Chamber's interception of Japanese diplomatic traffic becoming public and Japan repudiating naval limitations.
Okay, so chaos.
Right. Amidst that chaos, this report landed on his desk, and according to the documents, he simply dismissed it, filed it away.
So the President of the United States is presented with verifiable proof of a literal non-human civilization operating beneath the waves, a direct threat to national security, and he ignores it.
Seems so.
That speaks volumes about how incompatible this reality is with the conventional world.
It does, but ONI, specifically the P4 desk, couldn't afford such willful ignorance. They recognized the existential threat the Deep Ones posed, especially to naval supremacy.
Right, the Navy would care about that.
Exactly. While other government branches could pretend the Innsmouth incident was just a strange, isolated event involving smugglers and cultists, the Navy understood the implications for control of the oceans.
And this is where the nucleus of Delta Green begins to form.
Exactly. ONI's P4 desk, which the sources describe as previously being viewed with a bit of amused disdain by other desks for its focus on obscure foreign naval intelligence.
So kind of a backwater desk?
Sort of. They quietly took custody of the Black Chamber cryptographers who had translated the Book of Dagon. They were hidden within P4, allowing their work and knowledge to continue in secret. Later, a small, hand-picked force of Marines and Treasury agents was attached to P4. These were almost entirely veterans of the Innsmouth raid, the people who had seen the horror firsthand and survived.
Wow.
This clandestine group, operating under the radar, became the backbone of what would eventually be known as Delta Green.
A small, secret cadre born out of a national security cover-up, comprised of people who knew a terrible truth the rest of the government refused to acknowledge. That's a powerful origin story right there.
It is. They continued operating through the 1930s, conducting various clandestine operations. The source mentions Operation Thimble in China in 1933 and notes Operation Bakelite in the Mosquito Coast was considered a significant failure.
Okay.
But it was during the global upheaval of World War II that this proto-Delta Green truly formalized and expanded its scope.
How did the war transform them?
Well, the sheer scale of the conflict meant encountering unnatural threats on an international level. P4 continued its work, now clashing with horrifying groups like the Karatechia.
The Nazi occult group.
Yeah, a Nazi organization dedicated to researching and weaponizing the unnatural. The source details specific operations, like Lifeguard in 1942. P4 operatives, working with French partisans, raided a joint Karatechia Deep 1 facility near Cap de la Hague in occupied France.
A Karatechia and Deep 1 facility.
They successfully severed that specific, nightmarish alliance.
So the war provided cover for operations against non-human threats while everyone was focused on human enemies.
Precisely. And it brought them to the attention of the highest levels of wartime intelligence. The documents describe a crucial meeting where General William Wild Bill Donovan,
Head of the OSS.
right, the legendary head of the newly formed OSS, was reportedly profoundly impressed by P4's work and their intelligence on organizations like the Karatechia. He saw potential.
Okay.
The source mentions he was initially presented with information framed around exploiting these Japanese militarists, perhaps a deliberate simplification to get his attention, focusing on leveraging the unnatural as a tool against known enemies.
Using cosmic horror for strategic advantage. That's peak wartime thinking, in a twisted way.
Indeed. Regardless of the initial framing, Donovan immediately integrated P4 into the OSS structure. The new group was granted a unique security clearance, specifically designated Delta Green.
Ah, there's the name.
Yep. While P4 remained the official designation on paper, the members themselves quickly adopted the name, referring to themselves simply as Delta Green.
And the original knowledge, the Innsmouth horror, remained their secret.
By 1942, the sources indicate the wider U.S. government had largely managed to forget or compartmentalize the true nature of the Innsmouth events.
Convenient forgetting.
You could say that. Delta Green, the group born from that incident, became the sole keepers of that profound, unsettling knowledge. The war gave them a new operational stage and new threats, but their core understanding of the unnatural was rooted in that original cover-up.
This takes us into the post-WWII era, a period the sources often refer to as the Majestic Era, stretching roughly from the late 1940s up to 2001. This sounds like a significant shift in the shadow war landscape.
It was a huge shift. The end of the global conflict didn't mean an end to confronting the unnatural. If anything, it escalated. Following events like the widely rumored and, according to these documents, very real 1947 Roswell crash.
Roswell was real, according to this.
That's what these files say. A new organization was formed. Majestic, or Majestic 12, as it's sometimes known in other contexts, was created specifically to deal with extraterrestrial threats. The sources confirm the capture of a flying saucer at Roswell, along with its occupants, the entities known as the Greys.
So, the core conspiracy theories about Roswell in this world, they're presented as facts.
According to the documents we're examining, yes. And Majestic's mandate evolved. Initially conceived as America's first line of defense against potential alien invasion, by 1981 they had ratified an accord with the Greys.
Accord, like a treaty.
Sort of. This was a chilling agreement. Technology and intelligence exchanged for Majestic's help in covering up the Greys' activities on Earth.
Trading human safety, or at least transparency, for alien tech. That immediately sounds like a recipe for disaster.
Well, Delta Green certainly viewed it that way. From its inception, Delta Green found itself clashing with Majestic.
How so?
Delta Green agents, still focused on containing terrestrial unnatural threats and operating with a more aggressive stance, often found their actions hampered or their hard-won artifacts confiscated by Majestic.
They were getting in each other's way.
Big time. The sources cite Operation Sunale Semper Tyrannis in 1952. Delta Green operatives assaulted an Argentine Antarctic expedition linked to the Karatechia, eliminating Nazi researchers still trying to harness unnatural power.
Still fighting Nazis in Antarctica in '52.
Right. And the source grimly notes the U.S. casualties from this mission were officially reported as Korean War deaths.
Covered up.
Completely. Delta Green was operating outside the system, often losing irreplaceable assets to the more powerful, better resourced Majestic.
So while Majestic was making deals with aliens, Delta Green was still fighting Nazi occultists and older horrors, all while being sidelined or actively opposed by the very organization supposedly protecting the world from the unknown.
That's the dynamic presented in these documents. Delta Green saw Majestic's approach to the Greys, the Accord, the cover-ups, as dangerously naive, potentially even compromised.
Compromised by the Greys.
That was certainly a fear. The sources note Delta Green operated as an unofficial conspiracy, often marginalized. They mention a disturbing instance in the 1960s where the CIA reportedly supported Cho-Cho cannibals in Vietnam for tactical reasons.
Wait, cannibals?
Yeah, Cho-Cho cannibals. Despite Delta Green providing dire warnings about the unnatural nature of the Cho-Cho, this highlights how conventional intelligence agencies focused on earthly concerns often dismissed Delta Green's warnings, sometimes with horrific consequences.
Just collateral damage in the Cold War, I suppose.
From the CIA's perspective, maybe? Not from Delta Green's.
And Delta Green wasn't immune to disaster either. The sources mention Operation Obsidian in 1969 as a major turning point.
A truly catastrophic failure. Obsidian reportedly resulted in the deaths of nearly 300 Marines in Cambodia.
300?
The sources don't give specifics on the how, just the outcome. They explicitly refer to this event as Delta Green's fall. This disaster severely impacted the organization, leading to increased scrutiny and further marginalization by Majestic, which saw it as proof of Delta Green's reckless and unauthorized methods.
Okay, so Delta Green is pushed further into the shadows. Were there other notable Majestic projects detailed in the sources during this era?
Yes, the documents mention several projects that hint at the depth of Majestic's research and its unsettling consequences. Project Aquarius involved intercepting and analyzing alien signals.
Listening for E.T.
Basically.
Yeah.
Project Mirage and research related to the mysterious USS Eldridge incident are also noted.
The Philadelphia experiment stuff?
Seems connected, yeah. With figures like Dr. Townsend Brown continuing research into gravitorics despite the dangers. Then there's Majestic SSG-2. This involved particularly dangerous research with something referred to only as the bucket.
The bucket, that sounds ominous.
It reportedly resulted in the deaths or incapacitation of dozens of personnel. It got so bad they had to post armed guards on the researchers and fake deaths to cover up the incidents.
It sounds like Majestic was accumulating its own set of dark secrets and catastrophic failures, perhaps even worse than Delta Green's.
The documents paint that picture. Majestic maintained its power and access largely through hidden assets placed within other powerful agencies like the CIA, NSA, and NRO. They were deeply embedded.
And the accord with the Greys, did it last through the decades?
The sources indicate the accord began to fray in the late 1980s. Tensions increased, and by May 2001, the Majestic Steering Committee formally informed the Greys that the terms needed renegotiation.
And the Greys' response?
Silence. The documents state there was never any further communication from the Greys after that point.
Just gone.
Their silence effectively ended the accord. This collapse triggered a significant event. An exodus of Majestic personnel and assets. Carrying valuable, often dangerous, research and technology, they scattered into the private sector, most notably forming private firms like March Technologies.
So, Majestic, the secretive alien liaison group, essentially dissolved or fractured, with its knowledge and personnel disappearing into corporate chatters.
That's the implication presented, and this created a vacuum, a moment of chaos that, according to these documents, was immediately exploited.
Okay.
This leads directly to the next major phase. The reactivation of the Delta Green name and what the sources call the schism, primarily taking place in the wake of the 9/11 attacks.
9/11. A national tragedy, but for certain powers in the shadows, a window of opportunity.
Disturbingly, yes. The chaos and subsequent restructuring of the U.S. government following the 9/11 attacks created a unique environment. The remnants of Majestic leadership reportedly exploited this to maintain their autonomy and consolidate control over unnatural intelligence gathering.
While everyone was looking elsewhere.
Right. Deliberately avoiding direct oversight from the White House, which was consumed with counterterrorism.
And they did this by reactivating Delta Green.
Precisely, but not the original conspiracy. They created a new project, given a deliberately bland and utterly uninformative name to hide its true purpose. The Security Studies Group, or SSG.
SSG sounds harmless.
Exactly. This program, as insiders came to call it, was specifically designed to masquerade as a high-level counterterrorism task force. Crucially, it was granted authority over old, ostensibly defunct clearances and programs, including the Delta Green security clearance.
They resurrected the name, but for their own purposes.
The sources indicate it was a very calculated move. Director Forrest James, placed at the head of this new program, reportedly intended the use of the Delta Green name as a deliberate message to the surviving members of the original Delta Green conspiracy.
The ones who hadn't joined Majestic or scattered?
Yeah, the ones the sources call the outlaws. James himself is a fascinating figure in this narrative. A former Delta Green agent who was court-martialed by the Navy, escaped federal custody, and was then recruited by Majestic under a new identity before 9/11.
Wow, quite a history.
His leadership of this new entity, wearing the name Delta Green, was a clear statement of intent, a co-option of their legacy.
So the program is essentially Majestic 2.0, wearing Delta Green's skin.
That's how the outlaws certainly saw it, and the documents support this interpretation. The program's methods are deeply rooted in bureaucratic control and information gathering.
Makes sense, given its origins.
They embedded personnel in key positions across the government, the Department of Justice, Department of Defense, Department of Homeland Security. They reactivated dormant programs and leveraged the post-9/11 security landscape to gain unprecedented access to global communications.
How unprecedented.
The source specifically mentions Operation Tiki Bar in 2013, a program that reportedly mined unnatural data points from illegal NSA intercepts and even social media.
Social media.
Yeah. Creating a live, searchable intelligence network covering the entire planet, specifically looking for unnatural activity.
A global surveillance apparatus, specifically looking for signs of the unnatural. That's chilling in its scope.
It is. Now let's turn to the outlaws. These are described as the original Delta Green agents and their loyal successors who absolutely refused to join the program.
The holdouts.
Right. They viewed it as a corrupted descendant of Majestic, inherently tainted by the association with the Accord and its failures.
A true schism, then. Not just a disagreement on tactics, but a fundamental break based on trust and principles.
A very real and bitter one. Key outlaw leaders mentioned in the sources include hardened figures like Donald Poe, the hypergeometry expert Emil First, and the intelligence operative Chun-Tae Woo.
Okay.
Their operational methods stand in stark contrast to the program's bureaucracy. They operate in isolated cells, relying on old networks of trust and loyalty forged in the original conspiracy.
So no massive headquarters or digital networks.
SAT, not like the program. Their communication and briefings are far more clandestine and low-tech. They meet in secure, often underground locations, bunkers, cellars, hidden vaults.
Off the grid.
Places assumed to be safe from modern digital surveillance. Their briefings are manual, written down on paper, meant to be memorized, and then immediately destroyed, sometimes using old-school encryption like one-time pads. They simply cannot and do not trust the digital systems the program relies upon and exploits.
They sound like they're operating like spies from a bygone era.
They are. They have minimal bureaucracy, prioritizing direct action and self-sufficiency. They rely on begging, borrowing, or outright stealing necessary resources, leveraging friendly assets outside the core conspiracy whenever possible.
Friendlies.
Yeah. The sources highlight that they see themselves as upholding the original Delta Green mission, unsullied by Majestic's compromises.
And the relationship between the program and the outlaws. It sounds fraught.
It is intensely tense and deeply distrustful. The program actively tries to find and recruit outlaws, offering them resources and the veneer of official authority that the outlaws desperately lack.
Trying to bring them into the fold.
While the outlaws, meanwhile, are constantly working to keep their operations and secrets hidden from the program, which they see as a threat almost as dangerous as the unnatural entities themselves.
Why? Because of incompetence or...
Potential for catastrophic mismanagement or exposure, yeah. The sources note a long line of recriminations and mutual suspicion between the two factions. It's a conflict not just of methods on the bureaucratic compartmentalized machine versus the decentralized conspiracy, but of fundamental philosophies about how to fight this shadow war.
So you have a hidden war against cosmic horrors layered on top of a bitter internal war between the two organizations supposedly fighting those horrors. The agents must be caught in the middle of that crossfire.
That's the grim reality presented in these documents.
Let's pivot now to what exactly these two factions are fighting against. The sources make an attempt to categorize the unnatural, even while admitting it's fundamentally beyond human understanding.
Yes, it's a necessary operational fiction, right? They try to impose some order on the chaos using categories like earthly intelligences, extra-dimensional intelligences, and other unnatural threats.
Which includes
Things like unhistory, unnatural tomes, and hypergeometry. But the documents repeatedly emphasize that these are just labels applied to things that defy rational classification.
Okay, let's delve into some specific examples of the entities mentioned. The deep ones, as we discuss, are tied directly to the origins of Delta Green.
They are foundational. The sources describe them as aquatic humanoids, capable of horrific interbreeding with humans, which is the source of the Innsmouth legacy.
The hybrids.
Right? Those 209 survivors of Innsmouth, the captured hybrids, were kept in detention until 1981 at a facility near Los Alamos, reportedly driven irrevocably mad by their decades of confinement away from the ocean.
That's awful.
Their physical description in the documents is viscerally unsettling. Fish-like features, visible gills, shrinking jaws, rows of sharpened teeth. They are linked to the Great Old Ones, Cthulhu and Dagon, figures of immense cosmic power.
Ghouls. The sources mention the DeMonte clan in New Orleans as a specific example.
A chilling case study. Ghouls are described as once human monsters who have become immortal by feeding on dead human flesh.
Charming.
They possess the grotesque ability to transform into previously consumed human forms, often using rituals like the Changeling Feast. The DeMonte clan reportedly operated in New Orleans since 1788, deeply embedded within the funeral industry.
Convenient access.
Exactly, allowing them access to their ghastly sustenance. Their activities were spectacularly exposed during the chaos and breakdown of civil order following Hurricane Katrina in 2005.
Katrina exposed them? How?
The chaos basically lifted the lid. The sources mention outlaws taking advantage of that window of opportunity, deploying death squads armed with tasers.
Tasers. Why tasers?
Reportedly, the electrical shock forced the ghouls to revert to their monstrous forms for identification and extermination.
Whoa.
Ghouls also have abilities like charnel visage, which causes terror, and gift of the grave, allowing them to heal rapidly by consuming corpses.
That detail about Katrina and the tasers is particularly vivid and horrific. What about hunting horrors?
These are described as horrifying, utterly unthinking mysteries, creatures of pure unnatural force. The sources speculate they could be favored servants of Nyarlathotep, or perhaps even larvae spawned by the enigmatic other gods.
Their appearance.
Baffling and terrifying, slimy, ever-shifting, a chaotic jumble of wings, claws, tentacles, and snouts. The documents highlight their aberrant flight capability, which is deeply unnerving.
How so?
They can reportedly move through any medium or dimension, phasing through walls or existing simultaneously in the air and elsewhere, and can match the speed of something as fast as a jet or as slow as a human being.
That's impossible.
Well, yeah. Encountering one is profoundly psychologically damaging, causing significant SAN loss. The source is listed as 11D10, reflecting a high risk of complete psychological collapse.
And sand loss. We'll probably touch on that more later, but it's basically psychic damage, right?
Essentially, yeah. Mental stability damage from confronting the unnatural.
Okay. Insects from Shagai. The name alone is unsettling.
They are indeed. Described as alien insects, they are intangible carnivores from between dimensions.
Intangible.
They use principles the sources call hypergeometric to possess human hosts, reportedly by flying directly into their brains. Their disturbing goal is not conquest in a traditional sense, but to force their human slaves to perform acts of depravity, feeding on the intense negative emotions those acts generate.
Feeding on emotions.
Apparently. The sources note they are extremely difficult to expose or destroy, being intangible, though bright sunlight is mentioned as a potential weakness. Can you imagine the horror of realizing your actions aren't your own, but driven by an invisible entity feeding on your despair?
That's a truly insidious form of control. UNCAiNNY. The sources mention strange subterranean cities and an anecdote about a boy named Brandon McGill.
The UNCAiNNY are presented as a new human species that resides in immense cavern systems beneath the earth, possessing cities described as Sath, Yanho, Yoth, and Enkai.
Under the Midwest, maybe.
The sources suggest some of these might lie beneath the American Midwest, yeah. They communicate telepathically and reportedly utilize undead slaves called Wendigowak, creatures animated by cold hunger.
Wendigos.
Seems related. One of their most baffling abilities is erasure. They can somehow make themselves unobservable to a specific target, even while standing directly in front of them or physically attacking them.
You just can't see them.
Even if they're hitting you. The anecdote about Brandon McGill is disturbing. A young boy who disappeared in Yosemite in 1980 was reportedly found decades later, chronologically over 40 years old, but appearing physically 6.
Still 6.
Having spent time in UNCAiNNY, the sources note multiple duplicates of Brandon McGill were reportedly found, some more true or original than others, seemingly used by the UNCAiNNY for unknown purposes.
Duplicates. The idea of multiple versions of someone and being erased from perception. It distorts reality in a fundamental way. Loigor.
Loigor are described as incredibly powerful, intangible entities whose very presence, their fields, can warp local entropy.
Warp entropy. What does that mean?
It can manifest in terrifying ways, causing rampant cancer in an area, generating dense, unnatural mists, or even vast, sudden explosions of force. The sources even mention them being in a war with another entity, Gatanathoa.
And they're intangible, too.
Immune to conventional material weapons. Their power seems tied to strange focus stones, which are reportedly recharged by intense human emotions like hatred and despair, a terrifying feedback loop. Their vortex ability is particularly destructive, described as ripping matter apart, ignoring armor. It reportedly takes a few turns, like 1d4 in the source, to build with a low, ominous rumbling sound before unleashing its devastation. They also possess a defense called transcendent, making them utterly immune to physical harm.
Immune to physical harm. How do you even fight that?
Good question. Maybe you don't. Maybe you just try to disrupt the focus stones or something.
Okay, the Migo, the fungi from Yugoth.
Yeah.
These sources link them directly to the Greys from the Roswell incident.
According to these documents, the Migo are the true intelligence behind the Greys, controlling them as biological automatons or constructs.
So the Greys are just drones.
Basically, yeah. The Migo themselves are described as utterly baffling and unsettling to behold, roiling, ever-shifting forms that defy stable description, causing profound insanity, 1d10 sand loss upon seeing their true form.
Right.
They reportedly came to Earth long ago to mine valuable resources. The sources state they staged events like the Roswell crash and others primarily to study human reactions and capabilities.
Wow. Just studying us.
Sometimes using specific constructs they created, like the NotebookLM. Their etheric flight ability allows them to move through any environment, including the vacuum of space, matching the speed of human aircraft.
Wow.
They also have a terrifying close-quarters ability called grapple and erase. If they grapple a human, they can inject a substance that induces complete short-term memory loss for about 12 hours.
Wiping the encounter.
Effectively erasing the encounter from the victim's mind.
Erasing memories. Another insidious violation. Serpent folk.
Described as an incredibly ancient race, predating humanity by eons, the sources state they are still present, often appearing in human disguise, pursuing bizarre and long-term plans for reclaiming dominance.
Still around. In disguise.
Yep. They are reportedly connected to the shining trapezohedron artifact, a source of strange power. They possess natural venom in their bite and have knowledge of various unnatural rituals, including horrifying ones like the Changeling Feast and the Fascination Ritual.
Shoggoths sound like pure, unstoppable, destructive force.
They are described as massive protoplasmic entities, originally engineered by the Elder Things as slaves.
Right. The Elder Things worker blobs?
Pretty much. Their appearance is nightmarish. Amorphous, bubbling masses from which eyes and mouths randomly form and dissolve. They possess immense physical STR and considerable armor, listed as plastic, resilient in the source, making them incredibly difficult to damage by conventional means.
Hard to hurt.
And their attacks are brutal. Grapple, crush, smash, and impale. Their CRU Esh attack is particularly lethal. If they successfully grapple a target, they can simply crush them, ignoring armor, and potentially even consume the victim, gaining HP in the process.
Consume them.
Yeah. The sources even mention encountering a Shoggoth weapon, a smaller, possibly modified version.
A weaponized Shoggoth.
Yeah.
Great. Spectral polyps. Invisible carnivores.
Yes, invisible alien carnivores that exist partially between dimensions. They have the deeply unsettling ability to congeal in angles, becoming partially visible only where edges meet.
So you only see them in corners.
Kind of, yeah. And they can use invisible, extra-dimensional limbs to attack. Their movement is silent and strange. They appear to float, reportedly moving at speeds up to 25 kph.
Silent, fast, invisible.
Their LHHLU attack uses these invisible whips, bypasses attempts to dodge, and has a 10% lethality rating.
10% chance of instant death per hit.
That's what it implies. Simply being in their presence causes intense psychological distress, with SAN loss listed as 1D61D20, reflecting the high probability of a serious breakdown.
Finally, the Yithians, the Great Race, the Time Travelers.
These are described as entities capable of traversing vast stretches of time by swapping minds with hosts across different eras.
Minds swapping through time.
The sources cite the well-known account of Miskatonic professor Nathaniel Wingate Peaslee, whose mind was reportedly swapped with a Yithian for years. Their original form is described as giant, cone-shaped coleopterous beetles from a distant future existing in a radioactive landscape. Apparently, their primary motivation is reportedly policing the timeline, making millions of corrections to historical events to prevent paradoxes or unwanted outcomes. They use human minds as temporary vessels for this work.
So they're trying to fix history or control it?
Unclear. Like many unnatural entities, simply encountering their true form causes significant SAN loss, listed as 1D61D8. The program is reportedly studying them in a project codenamed Empty Mountain.
That's a terrifying gallery of threats. These are just some of the known alien intelligences, as the source categorizes them. What about the great old ones themselves, the beings often whispered about in forbidden texts?
The sources are very clear on this point. These entities are fundamentally beyond human classification or even conception. They are not merely powerful monsters, but beings whose existence and manipulation of reality lie outside our understanding.
Not just big monsters.
No. The documents state that simply speaking their names, figures like Cthulhu, Hastur, Yog-Sothoth, Azathoth, does not automatically bring about instantaneous doom or damnation.
Oh, that's slightly reassuring.
Sort of. Instead, their names are found in dusty, obscure, occult, or anthropological texts that are themselves dangerous to study.
But they are real, and their influence is felt, according to this.
According to this material, yes. The sources list several specific great old ones and offer what scattered, fragmented details are known about them. Cthulhu, notably, exerts influence through a psychic dream call.
The Call of Cthulhu.
Right. Capable of reaching sensitive minds across the globe and inducing temporary insanity. Glocki is described with a physical appearance and emits a palpable aura of power that is terrifying to endure. Itlashua is linked to the Wendigo legend and sometimes reportedly controlled by the enigmatic Nodens, a figure of immense power who controls matter itself.
Nodens.
Shub-Niggurath, the black goat of the woods, is associated with twisted cults, amusingly noted in the sources as sometimes operating under the cover of health food businesses.
Health food cults worshipping Shub-Niggurath.
Plechinaka is mentioned as an entity that can be discorporated or dismissed using hypergeometric principles. Tsathoga is said to have a widespread global cult and be connected to subterranean cities like Enkai and Yoth.
Linked to the UNCAiNNY, maybe?
Possibly. The sources suggest that disinformation blaming Oklahoma earthquakes on fracking might be related to Tsathoga's stirrings beneath the earth.
Whoa, really? That's a specific claim.
It's what's in the files. Finally, Yig is described as a powerful but capricious snake god.
Beyond entities, the sources describe other, equally unsettling phenomena. Unhistory, unnatural tones, hypergeometry.
Unhistory refers to chronological oddities, events that the sources say don't seem to stick in the normal flow of history.
Don't stick.
Like they happen, but reality sort of smoothed over them. These often require delta green intervention to correct the timeline, implying that reality itself is not as fixed or stable as we perceive it to be. It's like liches in the fabric of time.
Unnatural tomes.
Yeah.
More than just dangerous books.
Much more. The sources stress these are not textbooks. They are maddening, difficult to understand writings filled with forbidden knowledge, like the Revelations of Glocki or the infamous Book of Dagon.
Reading them drives you mad.
Simply studying them inherently damages the human mind, causing significant SAN loss the deeper one delves. The documents even contain discussions about whether digital copies of these texts carry the same mental hazard.
Does a PDF drive you insane?
Without providing a definitive answer, they require immense sanity-blighting study, cross-referencing fragmented knowledge, and understanding the growing madness of their original authors or translators.
Hypergeometry sounds like something out of pure science fiction. or weird math class.
It's described as non-Euclidean geometry, but in the context of these sources, it functions more like a fundamental technology or a set of principles used by unnatural entities like the Migo or Loigor.
Alien physics.
Kind of. Both Delta Green factions, along with other groups, attempt to study and even utilize hypergeometry. The sources mention projects like Rainbow and the notorious project PuzzLE, which involve the Tillinghast resonator, an attempt to apply these principles with catastrophic results.
Tillinghast resonator. Sounds bad.
Emil Furst, among the outlaws, is noted as having significant expertise in this area. It's a dangerous bridge between mathematics, physics, and the utterly alien.
And rituals. A way for humans to interact with these forces, presumably at great risk.
Exactly. Rituals are the described methods for intentionally interacting with the unnatural. Studying them carries the risk of sand loss, similar to tomes.
More sanity damage.
Activating them requires significant costs, sometimes drawing upon the agent's willpower, health, or sanity, or even requiring human sacrifice.
Human sacrifice.
Oh, they have a terrifyingly wide variety of potential effects. Scrying across impossible distances, summoning entities from other dimensions, binding or dismissing them, transforming reality or oneself, or creating gates to other places.
Like magic spells, basically.
But much more dangerous and costly. The sources list several sample rituals, like the Ghoul's Changeling Feast, Charnel Meditation, Call Forth Those from Outside, Create Stone Gate, or Prayer to the Dark Man. It's the dangerous, practical application of unnatural knowledge, available to those desperate or insane enough to pursue it.
So the threats are incredibly diverse, from physical horrors to violations of physics and time to intangible entities and maddening knowledge. How does an organization, or rather organizations like Delta Green, actually operate in this environment?
Their operational methods, while differing between the program and the outlaws, often begin with a common point: an inciting event.
The thing that gets their attention.
Right. This isn't necessarily an encounter with the unnatural itself, but could be any unusual or disturbing event that brings an individual to the attention of Delta Green.
And how does the program typically recruit someone who's had such an event?
The sources detail a specific, calculated process. Program agents approach the individual, often under the guise of a conventional investigation.
We're from the government. We're here to help.
Sort of. They subtly ask for their help on a seemingly unrelated operation that might involve strange or unsettling elements. They're assessing the recruit's reaction. Do they panic in the face of the unknown? Can they maintain secrecy? Do they show a willingness to protect others from exposure?
Testing them.
The crucial test comes with a key requirement: absolute silence. The recruit is told they cannot seek explanations or talk about what they encounter with anyone, not their spouse, their boss, a therapist, or a friend.
Total silence.
If the recruit agrees, they shake hands. Later, the real call for help comes, and they are brought deeper into the program, often learning about the larger organization and its true purpose-only piece by agonizing piece due to the intense compartmentalization.
Compartmentalization sounds like more than just security. It's a fundamental part of the program's operational DNA.
It's absolutely central, functioning as a primary defense mechanism against exposure. The program operates under multiple, overlapping layers of secrecy and bureaucratic cover. It's hidden within other legitimate agencies like the CIA, NSA, DoD, and DHS.
Hiding in plain sight.
And to muddle any potential investigation or paper trail, the program reportedly changes its name and security clearance designation constantly. The sources mention this happening as often as 18 times between 2002 and 2017 alone.
18 times in 15 years. That's a lot of paperwork.
It sounds less like an organization and more like a bureaucratic ghost.
That's a good way to put it.
They have key offices, but they're buried deep within the government structure. There's headquarters overseeing the director and intelligence, D3 Office of Operations, where case officers manage the field agents and assign operations, often under deliberately deceptive cover stories like counterterrorism exercises.
Oh, yeah, drill.
Right. D4 Office of Research, responsible for studying captured entities and artifacts under projects like Drought, Empty Mountain, and Lambent, and reportedly working closely with private firms like March Technologies,
The majestic spin-off company.
and D6 Office of Security, handling counterintelligence, investigating internal threats to the program, implementing disinformation campaigns, and enforcing the chilling lethal findings policy.
The lethal findings policy. That phrase alone is deeply disturbing.
It is. The sources describe it as a ruthless measure. If surveillance or intelligence indicates a substantial risk of the program being exposed, security first attempts disinformation. But if there's an urgent threat, particularly from an agent deliberately revealing secrets,
Like someone's about to go public.
yeah, the policy dictates that other agents must immediately eliminate the source.
Kill their own agent.
Agents who come under suspicion internally are evaluated at headquarters. If they're deemed unsalvageable, too unstable, too compromised, or too much of a risk, they are reportedly eliminated.
So not only are these agents facing cosmic horrors that can shatter their minds and bodies, but they could be ordered to kill their own colleagues or be killed by them just for knowing too much or breaking under the strain.
That's the brutal operational reality the documents describe within the program. Agents receive limited resources and briefings from their case officers, sometimes at secure safe houses or SCIFs.
Secure facilities?
Right. As the sources emphasize, they are under strict need to know and cannot expect full explanations, only orders.
And what about recovering captured unnatural items? Is that also handled by the agents?
Generally, no, that's a separate function. Asset recovery is handled by specialized teams. Historically known as Operation VAiLLEY FLY under Majestic, it's now reportedly Project Coral Nomad under the program.
Another bland name?
Yep. This function is also strictly compartmentalized. The recovery teams are kept separate from the agents involved in the operation where the item was found. Recovered evidence is sealed in containers to prevent the recovery personnel, like flight crews, from having any idea what they're transporting. Very few Coral Nomad personnel have any knowledge of the program's true nature or the unnatural world.
Okay, now let's contrast that highly bureaucratic, compartmentalized structure with the outlaws. How do they operate?
Their defining characteristic is radical decentralization. They operate as isolated cells referred to in the sources as A cell, B cell, and so on.
Cells, like a resistance group.
Exactly. They rely heavily on old networks, personal loyalties, and trust built over years, dating back to the original Delta Green before the schism.
So no central command structure or elaborate offices.
Not in the same way. Their communication and briefings reflect this. They conduct less formal meetings in secure, non-governmental locations, underground bunkers, private cellars, hidden vaults.
Places a program hopefully doesn't know about.
Places chosen precisely because they are outside any surveillance grid the program might control. As we mentioned earlier, their briefings are typically handwritten, meant to be memorized, and immediately destroyed, sometimes using one-time pads for encryption. They maintain a profound distrust of digital systems.
They must be incredibly self-sufficient.
Absolutely. They don't have access to the program's vast government resources. They have to beg, borrow, or steal what they need. They rely heavily on friendly assets allies outside the core conspiracy who can provide support, information, or resources without being fully read into the terrifying truth. The sources emphasize their key difference from the program: less bureaucracy, a focus on direct, often brutal, action, and a deep commitment to what they see as the original Delta Green mission, uncorrupted by Majestic's legacy.
It paints a picture of two very different animals using very different tactics to hunt in the same dark jungle.
It does. And regardless of which faction an agent belongs to, these documents highlight the immense challenges they face. The sources stress the constant grinding stress, the high rate of death, and profound burnout experienced by agents.
It sounds like an impossible job description.
The sources explicitly state the demands are impossible. Agents must be willing to lie, cheat, and fight their way through situations no human should ever face.
The toll must be enormous.
There's a significant risk of deep psychological impact. They can become adapted to violence and helplessness, emotionally numb or desensitized to the horrors they witness and perpetrate.
Adapted to violence.
And then there's the core mechanic of this world, the relentless toll on their sanity from exposure to the unnatural. That sand loss we mentioned.
Which, as we discuss, is not just seeing something scary, but confronting something that fundamentally breaks your understanding of reality.
Precisely. The sources are clear that exposure to the unnatural is vague, unsettling, and often beyond human explanation. It corrodes the mind. The documents point out that agents should live in mortal fear of losing their humanity, of becoming as monstrous as the things they fight.
Becoming the monster.
And that this price being paid is a central reality of their existence.
You can truly see how operating in this world would leave permanent scars, physically and mentally.
It's a constant state of existential risk, one that defines the life of an agent.
Let's take a look at some of the key figures mentioned in these sources, the people who are leading these desperate factions in the Shadow War. Starting with the program's leadership. At the top is Director Forrest James.
A pivotal and deeply flawed figure in this narrative. As we touched on, he's a former Delta Green agent, court-martialed by the Navy, who escaped custody and was then recruited by Majestic before 9/11.
Quite the resume.
The sources note he carries significant trauma from a past SEAL mission where he encountered deep ones, an experience that seems to have profoundly shaped his worldview.
The Innsmouth connection again.
Mm-hmm. He maintains a key alliance with March Technologies, inheriting Majestic's corporate connections, and is the architect and enforcer of the program's brutal lethal findings policy.
Right, the kill order policy.
The sources cite Operation Somersault as a horrifying example, where James reportedly authorized targeting individuals with Innsmouth ancestry, even children as young as 18 months old, based on perceived genetic risk.
Targeting infants based on ancestry. That level of ruthlessness is chilling.
The documents portray James as someone who never recovered from his trauma, operating under a grim, almost fatalistic philosophy. He must kill things before they kill him.
Kill or be killed writ large.
And ultimately, he believes he must himself be killed for the good of the program. His personal connections have eroded, leaving him isolated at the top.
Who is his closest ally and protector? Security Director Oakes.
Oakes is described as an exhausted assassin, James's key confidant, and the person who reportedly helped build the bureaucratic walls to insulate the program from outside scrutiny.
The enforcer.
Her background is equally hard-edged, including military police, NRO Delta, and involvement in Majestic's Garnet project. The sources note she struggles with stimulant addictions and disorders like depersonalization, reflecting the immense toll of her work.
The job gets to everyone, it seems.
Perhaps most unsettlingly, the documents state her own belief that she will one day have to kill James for the program's survival, and she harbors doubts about whether she is strong enough to do it.
Wow, that adds an intense layer of tension to the program's inner circle. What about intelligence?
That falls under Admiral George Gates. Retired from the U.S. Navy, he now serves as the program's Director of Intelligence. Gates also functions as a consultant and lobbyist with March Technologies.
There's March Tech again.
Highlighting the intertwined relationship between the program and the private sector inheritors of Majestic's legacy. He reportedly played a key role in Project Tel, which dealt with the threat posed by the time-traveling USS Eldridge.
Dana Shelton handles the money.
Yes, Dana Shelton is responsible for funding and program covering within the bureaucracy. She is reportedly able to trace the complex financial connections linking the program back to March Technologies. The sources credit her with being a vital check on the program's worst impulses.
A voice of reason?
Perhaps. Someone who still believes in the core mission and protects her own sanity by deliberately avoiding direct exposure to the unnatural.
Are there notable researchers within the program?
Dr. Gregory Tapham is mentioned. He was reportedly involved in the USS Eldridge project and is described as being infuriated that the world-saving outcome of that project was kept secret from the public. He remains a researcher obsessed with understanding the limits of human understanding and endurance when confronting the unnatural.
Wants to know how much people can take.
Seems like it.
And Charlie Bostic, the disinformation man.
Charlie Bostic handles public affairs and disinformation for the program. The sources note he is prone to paranoia and is considered a potential exposure risk despite efforts to contain him.
A leak risk.
Reportedly due to an irrational compulsion to confess the truth. A dangerous person to have in charge of lies.
Definitely not ideal. And Gavin Ross. He sounds like a direct link back to the Majestic era.
He is. Ross was a former Majestic leader who reportedly became disillusioned with the accord with the Greys. After Majestic's decline, he helped form Ansile Inc., one of the firms that inherited Majestic data.
Another spinoff?
Using it for lucrative R&D contracts with the Department of Defense. The sources mention he requires a substance called ARD-15 to survive, hinting at past exposure or experimentation, and is actively pursuing immortality.
Trying to live forever. Figures.
He's another example of how Majestic's legacy lives on in the private sector, still influencing the Shadow War.
Okay, let's turn to the Outlaws' leadership, specifically A-Cell, which seems to be the central group in these documents. Who leads them?
Donald Poe, known as Agent Alphonse or Charlie, is presented as a key leader of the Outlaws. He's described as hardened, unsentimental, and views the program with utter contempt, calling it a bastard child of Majestic.
Doesn't mince words.
No. He reportedly lives an isolated existence in rural Pennsylvania, maintains an extensive arsenal, and has sole access to their primary bunker headquarters. He's portrayed as the stoic, prepared figurehead of the resistance.
Emil First, their expert on strange science.
Agent Aaron. First is the Outlaw's primary expert on hypergeometry, controlling the rare instances where they deploy such technology. He also possesses personal mastery of unnatural rituals,
The ritual guy.
reportedly believing these arcane arts are the Outlaw's and perhaps Delta Green's only real hope against overwhelming odds. The sources list specific artifacts he carries, like a fetish necklace and powder of Ibn Ghazi. He's noted as struggling with depression and a totemic compulsion, suggesting the price his knowledge exacts.
Chun Te-Wu, their intelligence operative.
Agent Anton. Wu serves as the Outlaw's intelligence and cyber expert. He was reportedly an ally who wasn't fully read into the conspiracy before joining.
Brought in from the outside.
He uses his skills to penetrate government systems and recruits tiger teams of computer security experts, often leveraging resources from the government agencies he infiltrates. Interestingly, the sources state he secretly harbors the belief that the program actually had the right idea about centralizing resources,
So, some doubt within the Outlaws, too.
highlighting the complexity and internal debate even among the Outlaws.
Curtis McRae.
Agent Bernard. McRae acts as ACEL's frontman, managing external relationships, including delicate interactions with potential defectors from the program. He's described as having strong loyalty to Poe, but struggles with anxiety and addiction disorders, another example of the psychological toll of this life.
He had none knots.
Agent Charlotte. Knotts is also part of ACEL's leadership, managing operations for the group. Her background is in Army CID and the FBI. The sources note her need for extreme secrecy from her wife and mention her distinctive braided hair.
Are there other notable allies mentioned outside these two factions?
Grant Emerson, PhD, is noted as a valuable ally. He's a researcher encountered during an investigation into a viral hemorrhagic fever reportedly linked to a gaseous creature.
A gaseous creature, okay.
He has extensive connections within biological research agencies worldwide, making him a crucial source of information and resources for dealing with biological unnatural threats. James Zeringer is also listed as an important individual, suggesting a role of significance, though the details provided in the sources are less extensive.
So we've delved deep into the tangled history, the horrifying nature of the threats, the contrasting structures and methods of the program and the Outlaws, and met some of the people caught in the middle of this shadow war. What are the broader implications that these sources present about the nature of this hidden world and the fight to protect our reality?
Well, one of the most profound implications is the very nature of the conflict itself. These documents depict the fight not as a conventional war against monsters that can be defeated.
Not winnable in the traditional sense.
Right. But as a desperate, unending struggle against overwhelming, incomprehensible forces, the strange eons that exist beyond our reality. The goal isn't victory, it's containment. A desperate, often futile effort to protect normal human existence and prevent the unnatural from fully intruding.
It's a fight for delaying the inevitable, perhaps.
There's certainly that sense of foreboding. Another critical implication is the absolute centrality of information control. Secrecy, deliberate disinformation, and extreme compartmentalization are not just tactics, they are the primary weapons and defenses for both factions.
Like the Oklahoma earthquake example.
Exactly. Attributing the effects of ghoul activity during Hurricane Katrina to mundane chaos, or encouraging the narrative that Oklahoma earthquakes are due to fracking to hide a potential connection to Sothogwa. Knowledge correlation, putting disparate pieces of unnatural truth together, is seen as one of the greatest risks.
Connecting the dots is dangerous.
Leading to the deliberate suppression of information, even among agents. It creates a world where ignorance is often the only protection.
And you touched on it earlier, but the price paid by the agents. The psychological toll is a constant, devastating undercurrent.
It's central to the narrative these sources convey. The psychological and physical toll is immense. Sanity lost from exposure is not a theoretical risk. It's an occupational hazard that defines their lives. Burnout is rampant.
I can only imagine.
There's the constant, horrifying risk of losing their humanity, of becoming so desensitized or morally compromised by the things they must do that they become indistinguishable from the monsters they hunt. The demands are impossible, and the psychological impact, becoming adapted to violence and helplessness, is a pervasive form of damage.
Despite decades of fighting this war, with vast files and research projects in both factions, how much do they actually know about the unnatural?
The sources are remarkably consistent on this point. Despite the extensive files, the research conducted by the program's D4, the artifacts held by the Outlaws and studied by figures like Emil First, Neither faction possesses anything resembling a complete or concrete understanding of the unnatural.
Still flying blind, in a way?
Wild theories abound, fragmented pieces of knowledge exist, but there is no organized cosmology, no unified theory that makes sense of it all. They are operating with terrifyingly incomplete information, constantly trying to piece together a puzzle that is actively trying to shatter their minds.
And the threat itself seems to be evolving.
Yes, the source material makes a compelling observation. In our modern age of instant communication and global connectivity, the most dangerous threats may no longer be powerful, centralized cults operating in secret, but rather isolated, desperate individuals who accidentally stumble upon remnants of the unnatural. The ease of information flow means that accidental exposure can quickly lead to revelation, bringing undeniable proof of the unnatural closer and closer to the surface of our world.
Like a slow leak.
Potentially changing human understanding of reality forever and bringing us closer to an unknown, terrifying future.
That idea connects back to us, the listener. Why does delving into this hidden world, this horrifying fight, matter to someone living in the normal world?
Because it uses the framework of cosmic horror to explore very real human anxieties and challenges. It's a look at the fundamental limits of human knowledge when faced with something truly incomprehensible.
Things we can't understand.
It grapples with the overwhelming challenges of information overload and control in an age saturated with data, where discerning truth from elaborate disinformation is increasingly difficult. It forces us to consider the psychological impact of confronting things that break our reality.
The stand-loss factor.
And the profound, often terrible ethical compromises that some individuals might believe are necessary to protect the world as we know it. It's a story about organizations trying to use every tool at their disposal, from advanced surveillance tech to arcane rituals, from bureaucratic obfuscation to direct violence, to impose order on the utterly unknowable.
It's a chilling exploration of the idea that perhaps the most dangerous truths are the ones hidden in plain sight, or deliberately buried by those who think they know best.
A deeply unsettling thought.
Well, we have certainly taken an extensive deep dive into this hidden world. We've traced Delta Green's grim origins from the shores of Innsmouth and the shadows of World War II through the complicated, often compromised, majestic era, and into the painful schism that splintered the organization into the bureaucratic program and the decentralized outlaws.
Right.
We've examined the terrifying entities and phenomena they face, from the biological horrors of deep ones and ghouls to the reality-bending nature of hypergeometry and unhistory, and the cosmic scale of the great old ones. We've seen how these two factions operate, contrasting their methods, and met some of the key figures burdened by the responsibility of leading this desperate fight.
And we've highlighted the immense cost this war extracts, the sanity, the humanity, the lives of those who step into the darkness, and the precarious balance of knowledge and ignorance that keeps our known world from unraveling entirely.
These sources leave us with a powerful, lingering question. They tell us that despite every effort by Delta Green, the unnatural is slowly, perhaps inevitably, leaking into our world, one revelation at a time, pulling us ever closer to something unimaginable.
The ultimate question these documents seem to leave us with isn't if we will eventually confront the full truth of the unnatural, but what we will be forced to become when we do.
Something to truly ponder.
Indeed.